then let's plan for when it can happen. And what that means is no more around and no more non-focusing. Focus,
Yeah.
choose the
Focus.
direction, and freaking get there. But anyway,
Focus.
okay, so what
Focus.
are we focusing on today? What the hell are
Oh,
we
I
talking
don't know.
about?
Let's start this. Welcome to Pros Talking Pros.
Oh,
This
you're
is
recording
this.
already.
Yeah, I
What?
am.
Ah!
This is Troy from
Oh,
The Plot Abides. He is the plot dude, and I am Stacey from Edits by Stacey and Prince Bro. We are here to talk to you all things writing and publishing and the author business. And I will have to admit that Troy and I are coming to you completely unprepared. We have not
oh,
preemptively come up with a topic, and so I feel like there's some things that I could that you and I can chat about. This can kind of be one of those free form talks, and we can kind of see what this comes up
hmm.
with. But I feel like something that is really hot on my topic brain right now, and yours probably because you've been on a podcast or two about this recently. Let's talk true crime a little bit. Let's talk some true crime.
Oh,
You and I like serial killers. Well, we don't like serial killers, but we like to delve into the mind of the criminal, right? And kind of
right.
understand people and behavior. And I would love to talk about a few things that are kind of like just fresh on my brain right now. I'm editing a book that recently I'm struggling. I'm struggling. I want to love this book very, very much. And I love the premise of the book. But one of the things that I noticed is there's a lot of unrealistic things that are happening in the book that I feel like writers tend to miss when they write crime. They don't really go
Hmm.
into like the specifics and the details that people like you and I know, and like readers of this genre know. And I feel like if you go into this genre, any kind of crime genre, and you start writing about things with like the difference between a coroner and a medical examiner, and the difference between a detective and a police officer, and the difference between, like, and you mess those things up, you can really tick off your audience. So,
Mm-hmm.
one example, and I will go ahead and use this as an example, is that in this particular book, I've noticed there's an interrogation scene where the two officers are state troopers, and they've come in and they're investigating and questioning a suspect for a like a attempted assassination, basically. And before, the guy just came out of surgery, so he's a little bit groggy. And before they even get into the room, they order the nurse out. They tell her, we need the room, give us the room. And I'm like, okay, first of all, troopers would never do that, because troopers are courteous and they know that the medical personnel in any hospital has like carte blanche to kick you out. So the nurse actually in that scenario has more power. So you would ask if you could
Hmm.
have the room. The patient just came out of surgery, and the nurse actually would actually know that you were about to interrogate, and they would be able to let you know this person's not going to be able to be very coherent, or you know what I
Well,
mean. They're going to know.
and it's not admissible in court
Right, it's
if
not
they are a
admissible
certain
if
level of not cognizant.
right,
The other
and the
thing that
nurse
troopers
knows
know,
this.
just to insert one thing in here, is first of all, police officers get injured, and they
Yes.
want that nurse to remember them as someone who's kind and
Yep.
wonderful and loving, who they would like to save their life if they come in the emergency room.
Yep.
So, I mean, there's things like that as well, but I like where you're going with this, so keep going. But I just wanted to point those little things out that I'm like immediately stood out in my head, like, ah, oh, for more than
Yeah.
one reason, that doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
But anyway, go ahead,
But
go ahead.
the other thing is here's another red flag. The chair, they used the chair from the room and shoved it under the doorknob of the hospital door. Oh, for those of you who are listening and not watching, Troy
Oh,
nearly did a spit take. Can't
oh,
do that.
my
That
head.
right.
Oh,
So then after that,
okay.
we'll just
Go ahead.
everyone who knows like that is we all know why that's a bad one, right? Like that doesn't happen. But also it goes on, they start questioning this guy without giving him his rights. They don't read his rights. And
Oh,
even if they were on the sly side and they were trying to be like very sneaky about questioning this known, like seasoned criminal, they would still give that criminal some version of Miranda. They have to. Otherwise, anything they
mm,
use to get search warrants, anything they use to get um, anything, they're not going to be able to use it in a court of law. So they have to Mirandize this guy in some way or shape. So that was the other thing. And then they went in to question this guy, and it was very hot and heavy right off the gate. And I was like thinking, human behavior, especially with a seasoned criminal, the guy's just going to climb up and say, I don't want to talk to you. And he's not going to say anything. So you're not going to get anything coming into an argument with a well-known seasoned criminal, just being combative right out of the gate. It just never results in anything. And
oh,
that's just from study of human behavior, right? So this is someone that I know from and I'm going to go ahead and say I have extensive experience in this, because this is what I surround myself with. Anytime anybody in my house is having a dry conversation, I'm in true crime. So it's crazy to me how few authors study when they write about these things. And these aren't things that you have to be even in the crime genre. Like these are things like, you know what I mean?
hmm.
Mystery, all kinds of the
Okay.
thrillers. So let's go into this.
Oh,
Your brain is
okay. So
exploding, Troy.
first, like I don't even want to address this individual
No,
instance. I want to just address things on a broader scale
let's do it.
for the simple reason that, first of all, so everybody knows the difference. Well, maybe not everybody. So we're just going to explain it. The difference between hard crime and hard sci-fi and soft crime and soft
Yeah,
sci-fi, right?
right,
Soft sci-fi, anything can happen because you
right.
just say it works, and your reader goes, okay, it works, okay, and they follow you along. Hard sci-fi is those are readers and authors who are hard into the science. So I have a friend of mine, Nick Nelson, who I did the editor
Mm-hmm.
thing with. Dude is perfect for editing hard sci-fi. He's a member of Mars Society and the Lunar Society. He is
Mm-hmm.
plugged into what's happening with astronauts and outer space and the science that we're learning from studying space. Like, dude is
Mm-hmm.
plugged in, right? So if you're writing hard sci-fi and you need an editor, he's a great guy to have because your readers are going to expect you to know the science, and they're
Right.
going to expect it to at least have a chance, maybe with a stretch of reality, how it is now. They're going,
Mm-hmm.
how we understand it now, they're going to expect it to be something that could actually work.
Right.
So you're not
Exactly.
going to have a Star Trek transporter because we don't know how to scramble people's molecules, send them along a beam,
Well,
and then reassemble them
we'll talk
without
about that.
issue,
We'll talk about that on
right?
another episode, because I
Right.
actually
That's,
have a cousin that was working on that project. Anyway, moving on.
oh yeah, no, no, no. It's been experimented with, and
Yeah,
objects work wonderfully, but
they haven't done people
creatures,
yet.
there's some problems. There's
Mm-hmm.
some problems. Even
Mm-hmm.
with animals, there's trouble. Okay. But anyway, so we're not okay. But still, things are possible, but because
Mm-hmm.
when you add life to it, there's other issues. But anyway,
Freud's gonna
okay.
squirrel.
Squirrel, sci-fi squirrel. Okay. But again, we're not going to go down individual instances, but we're going to talk
No.
about hard crime versus soft crime. So if you're going to write cozy mysteries, you have a lot of leeway because typically it's an amateur sleuth in an isolated situation. You're not worried about what police procedures are. Now, you are worried about how certain things like poisons and weapons
Yeah, you
actually work.
should know how those things work. You should know the
So
difference between a
you,
coroner and a forensic investigator. You should know the
well,
difference between a
yes, there's
coroner and
so
a medical examiner. You should know
there's
those
things that you
differences.
should
Hmm.
know. There's things still that you
Right.
should know about crime, but some of the details of like the police department and how it actually works, you don't want. Like I'll give you a for instance. Okay, one thing drives me crazy. Many of you know my partner Holly works at a prison, right?
Hmm.
And their radio protocol at that prison is horrible. absolutely terrible because there is a military and typical law enforcement method for communicating on a radio, which is very important for crisis situations. And that
Right.
prison, the people at that prison do not follow it. Like it
Oh,
is not
dear.
even a written thing. Okay. Because when you say things like the end of you make a statement on the radio, at the end of that, you say over and then you stop keying the mic. What that means is it is your
Your
turn
turn
to
to
talk.
talk. Hmm.
So you never use the phrase over and out because you're like, what that means is
You're
it's your
done.
turn to talk, but screw you, I'm ending the conversation.
Yeah.
Okay.
Out me
That
out means
sounds
the
like
call is over.
that sounds like a marriage breaker. Okay. So don't do that to your wife either. She's like having a conversation with you. You say over and out because you're going to get hurt, my friend. Anyway,
I'm
but
using that. I'm using that tonight. I'm using it.
don't don't use that on Will. Don't tell him that I said anything about that. Will, if you're listening to this, I'm sorry, man. Anyway, but so out means the conversation is over, which clears the airwaves for somebody else to take over,
Right.
right? If you don't do this, and especially in law enforcement, you can have people talking over each other on the radio, which then what the result of that is chaos, right?
Right.
Okay.
Hmm.
So you don't have to know all the details of that if you're writing a cozy mystery because it's unlikely that your sleuth is on the radio with the police if they're an amateur sleuth. If they are, that's another red flag because police don't just give you their radios and say,
Nope.
"Here,
Here.
chat it up, Gertrude." No, it's not the way it works. Okay?
Gertrude.
That's not how any of this works. Okay. So, but if you're doing hard crime, police procedurals, investigative procedurals, noir, stuff like that, you need to understand how police departments work, how communication happens, how
Hmm.
departments work together, what people do within departments. All of those CBS FBI shows are wrong because
Hmm.
that's not how FBI agents work. Now, we know that, right? If you're a hard crime person, you know that, and you allow them to fictionalize it because you realize, like, we couldn't have the desk agent and the other agent, and there'd be just too many cast of characters, right?
Right. Right.
So we got the same guy working the desk, writing the reports, investigating the crime, and going out on the SWAT team. None of that works that way. But we allow it because even though we know it doesn't work that way, we understand for fiction we have to make things happen more
But you
smoothly,
still have to
right?
have those other elements of realism in order for it to stay grounded in that reality. Otherwise,
Right.
it'll go off the rails and people will
And
immediately just get irritated.
so let me also tell you what you're doing when you're writing an FBI thing like that, or like Law and Order, or all those different things, right? What you're
Hmm.
doing is writing a fantasy, and what you have to do is you world build at the beginning, and then you must follow those rules, the same as you must with a fantasy. In this case, how the FBI shows work on CBS is a magic system because that's not how real life works. It's a cop fantasy. Okay. And so you have to adhere to those cop fantasy rules. The way the magic works this time, it has to work that way the next time too. So you can't switch it between episodes, right? It doesn't work. Now, sometimes they do, and it irritates me to death. But you have to understand that. Like if it takes 3 days to get DNA back in your first episode, then every time we submit DNA, it has to take 3 days,
Hmm.
right? Because that's what we've stated as the rules of the magic system, right? Even though we know in the real world it does not come back that fast, even if you try to rush it. There is no DNA rush lab sitting around waiting for your emergency thing.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
It doesn't happen. Those people have jobs, they have lives, same as everybody else does. They go home at the end of the night, have families, all that kind of stuff. So there's not a guy working through the night at the coroner's office. If there is, he's the janitor. Okay, that's just not the way things work,
Which, by the
right?
way, they make great criminals. I've had a couple. There's a
Hmm.
crime. There's a case I know. Anyway,
Oh yeah. Anyway,
they're
so we
great
could
at
go off on
cleanup.
the true crime, but
Mm.
here's I think the point of all this as an author is first of all, you need to do your research and know how it works so that you can break the rules in a way that is believable.
Right.
And if you're creating a magic system within your mystery and thriller thing or whatever it may be, understand that that's what you're doing. You are world building. You are writing science fiction.
Hmm.
You are writing fantasy, even if that's not your genre.
Right.
Okay, you're allowing the police to allow to consult with a novelist in Cabot Cove or whatever the hell that town was, right? Or
Yeah.
Miss
Yeah.
Murder She Wrote, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
The police do not normally do that. They do not
Yep.
consult with a novelist. Now, I've been on crime podcasts and they consult with novelists,
Hmm.
but that's different. That's a completely different thing. That just because I was on that podcast, the Ada County Sheriff didn't come to me and say, "Hey, Troy, what do you think of this murder case?" No, they're not going to do that because it's not realistic. It doesn't work that way. They call in consultants, but it's not a fiction writer,
Yeah.
right? It's not a photographer. They have their own people that are like that, right? That's number one. Number two, they're not going to pay you. So you're not going to do it for very long. We can't just do things for enjoyment all the time. As much as
Hmm.
we'd like to do that.
Yeah,
I'd
as
love
much
to
as
be
we'd
a
love to.
consultant all the on those cases, but this is not, it's just like the armchair quarterback on Sunday watching
Oh yeah.
football, right?
They don't
The
even like
Jets
true crime
doesn't
part a
call
lot.
you up and say,
Yeah.
"Hey man, you know, what play should we run?" No, the head coach is not calling you in your living room saying, "Dude, I hear you
Mm-mm.
shouting at the TV, so what play do you think we should call?" No, it doesn't happen. Okay, so as understand that when you're going to suspend disbelief like that, that's cool. Do that, but understand that that's what you're doing. You're creating a fantasy, so know the
Hmm.
real rules, so you can basically acknowledge the
So
fact
you're
of,
not,
yeah, what we're
yeah.
creating here is not real,
Yeah, because what
right?
you don't want to do is create a floating unicorn in the middle of your story
Yeah.
about, it just it doesn't work. People will be like, "Where what the hell is that?" And they'll get really mad and close the book. And the number one goal of any
Hmm.
writer should be to never let your reader close the book. So maybe we should do like the top, like this is good because you've mentioned a few things. I'm gonna like I think we're gonna add on this list because so far, I mean, like we'll just call this the top 10 things to keep your book grounded when you're writing a crime or crime elements in your story. So one of the things you mentioned was that we need to research the police and legal procedures, but something that we talked about in a previous podcast that I think is a really good idea is also anchoring that, and you did kind of touch on this, is anchoring it in a correct timeline. So, or like anchoring it in a timeline, even if
Hmm.
that timeline is sped up for the sake of your book or whatever. Like when you read a Dan Brown and you're going through that, like that race against the clock, that in reality, it's not going to work like that. There's not anything that happens that fast.
Hmm.
But and like the DNA test coming back, although they do come back quite a bit faster than they used to when we were in the 90s, but nowadays they come back,
Well, yes.
there's still a time delay there. And there's also the checks and balances and making sure all of that comes through correctly so that there's not going to have any problems when they come to court. Because you got to remember, every one of these cops in any kind of scenario, they're all working to build a case that is prosecutable. So you've got to remember that. You've got,
Hmm.
sometimes you have these rogue cops that go off and they'll bend the rules a little bit. But remember that ultimately they're trying to build a case that's prosecutable. So if they're trying to catch a bad guy and you've like totally thrown out the whole idea of a court case in the future, fine. But understand and know that that's what's happening, like Troy said, because it's a rule that you're breaking. So you should know what the legal
Hmm.
procedures are so that you can also play on that when you're writing about this character, this rogue cop that's going off the books. You want to make sure that what the off the books rules are, or what the on the books rules are, so that you're writing these rules that the cop is breaking. So you understand that, so that the people that are reading your book understand that. Um, so that's all good. We've mentioned all that, but okay, so let's talk about this. There's a few things. I love true crime books. I also like fiction crime. Both are just very. I love thrillers. I love police
Hmm.
procedurals. I love them all. So, but one of the things, like you said, is just that a lot of times, sometimes you've got authors that can really bend the rules really well and some that don't. But there is an overall feeling that I get from all of these books, even when you're breaking rules and not, is that there is a respect and a like kind of almost a reverence for the legal procedures and the ethical procedures that happen in the background. So they can
Hmm.
like there's people that are, there's legal and ethical things that people understand and know when they deal with this type of world. One of the things is that the victims involved in any kind of crime um are almost, regardless of the type of victim, status, class, whatever you guys want to call it, race, religion, creed, color, sexuality, sexual orientation, whatever. Regardless of that, they're always going to be a victim and they're always going to be held in a manner of respect with a police officer. If you're any kind of, well, I mean, and like, and Troy, I was about to put this caveat. If you're writing a police officer that is going to be a dick and they're going to disrespect that, then know that that's what you're doing, because that's going to be the way it's interpreted.
Hmm.
You're not going to have respect for a criminal, um, regardless of regardless if they're the victim or not, or you're not going to have any respect for the cop or anybody if you're treating the victim like shit. And
Hmm.
case in point, but there's also another side of this. The flip side of this is treating victims that are oh not sympathetic, like and putting too much weight on their role in the story. So case in point, story I'm working on right now, the victim, the dead body at the beginning of the story is an unknown nobody drug trafficker, no relationship to anybody at all, and there's no stakes tied to
Hmm.
him, no relationships, no nothing. So the whole time this cop is going, this is weird, this is hinky, this is strange, this is the whole time as a reader I'm going, why is it strange? Because
Yes.
it's a drug dealer, it's just a drug dealer, it's a drug trafficker that has no relations to anybody. So why would it be strange? It's a drug dealer, he's got a high risk lifestyle,
Right.
which means he's going to get killed. Okay. So you have to be careful when you're weighing out these relationships in your stories. So I guess that's where I'm at. So
Well,
don't, you want to respect the legal
also,
and ethical and then the victim of the whole thing.
well, so a couple things on that. First of all, if there, so there are rogue police officers in real life,
Yep, there are.
but generally speaking, generally, and I'm not going to get into specific cases or whatever, but generally speaking, that person will not be an officer for very long.
That's true.
And usually they are a low-ranking officer, not in the detective and upper echelons of a police department, right?
Usually, unlike the
Usually.
go-go
Now,
case, which we can talk about
there
later.
are some instances, well, yeah, there are some instances where, first of all, victims are not as valued as they are in other cases. And here's one of the reasons why is very simply that police officers have an extreme shortage of time,
Yep.
an extreme shortage of time. So when you have your detective in a big metropolitan area like Chicago or LA or something like that and working hours and for days on a
Mm-hmm.
single case, understand that that is extremely unrealistic.
Rare. It's
If
rare.
you do not receive some kind of a major clue and resolution within 72 hours, more than likely that case is going to be shelved at least temporarily. And it doesn't mean it's going to be forgotten completely, but it means there are four new murders on my desk and I cannot spend all of my time and energy on this one. Nobody's going to offer me that overtime. And especially if it's a person that's a part of a marginalized group, like a drug dealer or a gang member or a prostitute who is living a risky lifestyle anyway. And if
Mm-hmm.
this particular murder did not kill them, something else probably would have, right?
Right.
Because of the type of lifestyle that they live.
Mm-hmm.
So police officers do weigh cases based on the victims and who they were and what their
Mm-hmm.
associations were, what their occupations were, that type of things. And cases that receive a higher profile in the media are ones that get more attention, right?
That's
So
true.
typically, that is not cases that involve gang members, is not cases that involve prostitutes and high-risk members of organized crime. Now, there have been times when members of organized crime have been killed, and an investigation into that murder unravels a huge thread of
Right.
organized crime. And yep, that happens. Absolutely. Sometimes officers will take that on. Absolutely, that does happen in real life. So understand, part of this is again, just understand that you're writing fantasy. This is why many of us, it's much easier to write about a private investigator who gets glommed onto a case and won't let it go
Right.
because no one is telling him he can't,
Right.
right? If in the case of an actual police department, your lieutenant, your captain, somebody in charge is telling you you can't. And it's not like the movies where you say, screw you, Captain, I'm going to Beverly Hills. No, that is not going to happen. It's just that's a really challenging thing to happen,
All
right?
right, Eddie
So,
Murphy.
yeah, I mean, you know what I'm saying? I mean, it's just, I mean, and hey, weird stuff happens in real life, but that's why it's the exception to the rule, right? But just understand what you're writing. It's okay to write it. It's perfectly okay to write it.
Yeah,
Just
yeah.
understand that you're stepping outside of those boundaries, exactly like we were talking about before, because some of that stuff does matter. Again, there are rogue cops, but generally speaking, they're not cops for long, but there are conspiracies. If you want to learn about this, look up the basically the making of a murderer, the Stephen Avery story. There is a huge conspiracy surrounding that was heinous and
I have a
terrible.
really, I mean, it's
Um,
not really
and
touched on
yeah,
right now, but the Gilgo case out there in the Gilgo Beach,
hmm
that police chief, man, I have a feeling they've only like linked like seven murders to the current Long Beach Long Beach? Not Long Beach.
no, they didn't call him
Long
Long
Island.
Beach,
Long Island.
Long
Long
Island.
Island killer serial killer.
Hmm
But the crazy thing is there was like several other bodies out there that were prostitutes, and one of
hmm
which they've still not linked to the Gilgo Beach murders, and who started the whole case in the first place. And I strongly believe that police chief, because they've wrapped him up in some seriously intensely weird sex scandals, that guy, like, he's guilty as the day is long. Like you said, though, it didn't take long for him to get caught. Like, he was seriously,
Right,
like, so damaged. But and who knows if they'll ever link this stuff to him. But you're right, you kind of have to, like, but the really good way for writers, I think, for them to kind of understand this stuff is get your hands dirty. And that means literally is getting your mind a little dirty here, because you've got to kind of go down these dirty, nasty, dark paths to kind of see how this stuff works, when you're writing about it, so that you cannot so that you're
right.
not so you we've always said this, it's got to work, right? Whatever you're writing, it's got to work.
Well, and
And
the other part is writing has to make sense.
right, it has to
Okay.
make sense.
So one thing that when you start to study true crime, a lot of times you don't know what the motive was of the criminal who committed the crime. And even if you find it out, the motive doesn't always make sense to a rational person, right?
Hmm.
In fiction, you kind of have to make it make sense because the only way the reader can, so the reader solves the murder along
Right.
with you as you're
Right.
writing it by three different things, which are the same things law enforcement uses: means, motive, opportunity.
Right.
Okay. Means, motive, and opportunity. Now, I mean, and it's really basic crime, right? And most of the time, when somebody gets eliminated as a suspect, it's because of they didn't have opportunity or motive. They have an alibi, which means they were somewhere else and could not have committed the crime at the time,
Hmm.
or they don't have the ability to do it, the means to do it. So it's an exotic poison that was used. Where did they get it?
Right.
Where did they get that explosives? Where did they get that weapon that was used in the crime? If they didn't have the ability to get it, then but then the other thing is always motive. Like,
Mm-hmm.
what is the motive? Why is the why behind doing it? In fiction, that kind of has to make sense. And a lot of times in real life, we don't know that motive. The Idaho murders that I was on the
The
podcast
podcast.
for last
Mm-hmm.
week, and then he was sentenced last week.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, they asked him at his sentencing why he did this, and he said, "I declined to answer." Well, okay, we may never know. We can guess all day long, but we can never know his true motive for that. And he may never tell us. He's going to spend the rest of his life in prison and hopefully in obscurity too. But anyway, it's my hope. But in that particular case, like there is no obvious motive. There was means, there was opportunity, and there was evidence, but there's still no motive,
We can
right?
speculate, but
So
yeah, you're right.
that's that's hard to write in fiction. And that's one of the
Mm-hmm.
my points when I was on that podcast last week is that it's challenging for us because we as people, we've consumed TV, we've consumed books, things like that, and we want it to
Everybody
make
wants to
sense.
know the why.
And it doesn't always make sense. So the number
Right.
one thing was like people were like, what do you want to know out of the sentencing? And of the people who are on that podcast, so many people answered, I want to know why. I want to know the motive.
Mm-hmm.
The other part, we can put together that from the evidence, from circumstantial evidence, stuff like that, but we don't know the why. So as an author working in this space, watch that. Understand that even if your motive is something twisted or whatever some psychological twist or something like that, have something,
Right.
right? Because it's hard to write a murder mystery that is true to 100% true to real life.
Right.
Okay, so understand the psychology behind killers, understand why they do what they do, because that's precisely why we can guess, like in this particular case, what the motive is because we understand the psychology of other killers, and it's highly unlikely that this guy is such a unique specimen that he has a motive that's outside everything we've ever seen before,
No,
right?
no,
So anyway,
I'm sure it's normal, but it's very much
mm,
it is the satisfaction level that it's even with the Lori Daybell Vallow Lori Vallow Daybell psycho. Like
hmm
we know the why. We all know the why. I mean, she hasn't come out and admitted the why, but she has
hmm
all but admitted it in all her actions and words and evidence and everything, like you said. But I think that that's another reason why this is so fascinating is because one, she's just off her rocker, weird. And then
hmm
on top of that, she's committed these crimes for a very, very basic reason. It's just she's so predictable in her motives. And yet because of the crazy, we're all sitting there going, why? But we all know why. But you're right. It's
hmm
it's it's because I think we're fascinated with her case because she's so much in denial. The case of
hmm
the dentist poisoning in Colorado right now is interesting because they're fighting with that. They're like, why would he do this? And they're
hmm
the only thing they can find out is he's had several mistresses and he's had money problems, and those are money, sex, that
yeah.
kind of thing. But at the same time, you're going to never hear a satisfactory answer from him because he's
hmm
never gonna admit it. In books, though, like you said, it's different. It's almost like you have to have that wrapped up why.
hmm
There was a really good book that I absolutely love. I actually did a review on it, and they're doing like a follow-up documentary on this, which I'm really kind of excited about. But J. Reuben Appleman, James Appleman, he wrote a
hmm
book called The Kill Jar about, oh gosh, it's been a while now, 10 years maybe.
10
Um,
years, I think. Yeah,
10
yeah.
years.
Been quite a while. Yeah.
Yeah. And they had a follow-up TV show series called The Children of the Snow that he was featured in about it. But that book, I think there was a lot of mixed reviews when he wrote that book. And the reason is because his publisher was pushing it as a true crime. It's a true crime. It's a true crime. It's a true crime. But the book is actually not a true crime. The book, the genre, he miscategorized it. It's a crime. It's a crime memoir. He wrote it as a memoir. And
Mm.
it's about him and how this crime transformed him and why he obsessed over it and how he's kind of
Hmm.
come to these conclusions. And he didn't solve it, but he kind of did in his mind. He solved it, and it took a lot, it took a toll. Like it took a toll on his relationship with his wife and his kids and his life and it's, like this whole thing. And that's what the book is about. So you don't have this wrapped up bow of this is the criminal, this is what he did, the life,
Hmm.
he was prosecuted and life is over. None of that, because it's an open-ended case. They never found the guy that did it. The guy committed suicide that he suspects did it. And it's just this, like, what the flip? And
Hmm.
you're left with this big question mark at the end of this book. And so people were very, very angry. This isn't true crime. Well, that's what I'm trying to say here is like, if you know what your genre is, you're going to have a better chance at meeting those readers' expectations. But when you are writing a crime novel, any kind of like crime, thriller, mystery, there is a pattern and an ending, very
Hmm.
much like romance novels. They expect that happy ending, right? There has to be that kind of like sense of satisfaction, and motive is a big deal. Motive is a big reason
Hmm.
why, which is why you have
Well,
a lot of criminals do their monologue in these kinds of books, right?
yeah, exactly. Which is a terrible method, by the
It
way,
is.
but
Yeah, it is.
it
It
happens.
is. But
But
they
I
do it.
mean, part of the thing is this is with a mystery novel, what's happening is your reader wants to be able to figure it out as you do,
Yep.
as your detective does going
Yep.
along, right? In real life, this is why truth, like the internet sleuth thing, is such a big deal right now
Yeah.
because people
Mm-hmm.
are trying to really help, legitimately help solve a crime,
Right.
but they're also, that is a dopamine rush that your reader is after. So I
Mm-hmm.
always have in my books what I call the astute reader moment. And it's
Mm-hmm.
usually just before the reveal about the
Cool.
mystery. And it's like, if you've really been paying attention at this
It's
moment,
right
you
there.
know just a little bit before everybody else, you go, wait, that's it?
Yeah.
Is that it? Is that really it? And then you turn the page, you're like, yeah, that's
Yes.
it. Well, what does that do to the
It's
reader? The reader's
dopamine.
like, yeah, man, I figured it out. And now I want to read the next book in this series
Mm-hmm.
because that puzzle was damn good, right?
Yeah.
So, but so that's what people are trying to do in real life with true crime is they're trying to
Yep.
follow along and figure it out and that type of thing. And that's why those people get angry at stuff like that is because in real life, there's not always an answer. We talked about, uh, I don't know, did we talk about that a few weeks ago where there's like a huge percentage of murders that are unsolved,
Yeah,
right?
the
In the
the
US,
FBI, yeah. And there's like
the
so many
FBI
that
thinks,
are
yeah.
going on. So
Yeah, 58% are
58%.
unsolved,
Yeah.
and it's higher in certain demographics in certain cities. So we do need to
Mhm.
qualify that. Like there's some definite breakdowns of demographics and where you are and the type of police department and what kind of a crime and all that kind of stuff. But still, that's a pretty astounding number in the US. It's a
Yep.
pretty astounding number. Well, but the reason for that is because things in real life aren't tied up neatly in a bow, right? Like
Hmm.
that strangers on the train type thing, where eventually we figure out these guys actually did know each other. But there's plenty of instances where something happens, looks like an accident, wasn't even a homicide reported, but all of a
Yep.
sudden this husband has a lot of money or whatever the case may
Well, it
be,
was
right?
just like I said,
So,
that
yeah.
kind of correlate with that statistic of, the cases unsolved. I threw out there that Matt Murphy came onto a podcast. He's a well-known criminal prosecutor, and he came onto a podcast recently and said that there probably anywhere from the FBI reports that there's anywhere from 20 to 30 serial killers currently operating today that they don't even know about.
Hmm.
So,
Hmm.
like
Well,
that's
yeah, there's a lot of speculation about that. And that part
mhm,
of it is because even despite the communications and the ability that we have, jurisdictions don't talk to each other.
right.
There are certain professions that make it much easier to travel around and
Hmm.
kill without being caught.
There's
There are
demographic of
certain
people.
victims,
Hmm.
there are certain victims that if they go missing and the body is never found, the search is not that extensive,
Mm-hmm.
and they may not even be reported as
Mm-hmm.
murders, right?
Right. Or
So there's
or
all
missing.
kinds of
Mm-hmm.
factors, or missing even, or if they're reported missing, it's very much like our daughter left Missouri and went to LA, and we think she was stripping in a club there or whatever, but nobody's heard from her in days. Shock and surprise on the fact of the LAPD? No.
No.
Huge manhunt with dogs and helicopters and all kinds of people? No. We basically put up some posters, put her picture up on a website, and hope for the best, right? So there, I mean, and that's just one example, right? There are tons of examples of things like that happening. So what this does, though, for fiction writers, it gives you a great opportunity. There are stories that you can tell and make them seem realistic, and we will believe it because we know if you
Mm-hmm.
follow true crime, if you follow these things, you know that this is happening somewhere, someplace, some way, right? You know it's happening. And so you're like, oh man, this could be happening in this area, in this
Mm-hmm.
place, whatever the case may be. You know, the other people around you know, and hey, you can make a great believable story out of that, or you can get a private detective that you say he's going to chase down all these cases. I mean, what do you think Jack Reacher is, man? He's going around solving problems for people who would normally just be ignored by law enforcement, stuff like that, right? Whole premise of that story. There's all kinds of stories that are set up that way. So really, for authors, it's an opportunity if you take it, if you understand what you're
If you
writing.
understand it.
Like,
Yeah,
what
if
are you
you
writing
understand
really?
it.
Like, but really, you need to understand it. And this applies to all areas of writing. We're talking about crime here, but I mean, it applies to all areas of writing. Is
Mm-hmm.
basically know your stuff. You want to make it seem like, so these people went to Mars or interstellar travel or whatever. Know the kind of accepted rules, know what's going on in the scientific community, know what research is happening, and write something realistic, but realize that understanding that, all of that science, creates opportunities for you that you
Mm-hmm.
can be like, oh, okay, there's actually some cool stories I can write there and make them realistic and still be true to the things that I want to write, you know.
Exactly. 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 So, oh, we are touching on a lot of these things that I was like listed out here. Um, one of the things, well, specifically, I want to kind of like really clarify this, what you're saying in a statement is basically make the investigation just as intriguing as the crime. Make the
Yes.
investigation part of like the story is the investigation, guys. So when you guys write a crime, make sure that you're making that investigation more, I think, intriguing. Make the characters who are pursuing the bad guy more intriguing, and that means don't glorify the killer. Don't don't glorify the criminal. And unless you're doing that specific kind of story, but
Hannibal,
if you are,
Dexter.
yeah, but if
Yeah.
you're writing a true crime, don't ever glorify the criminal, because there's victims involved and the victims' families. And if you know anything about the Koberger case, or if you don't, I suggest looking it if you're interested in this topic, because you will see how that crime rippled not only into the families and their friends and the university and the town and the state and the country. You'll see the ripples, and
Hmm.
it's phenomenal. It's phenomenal how that crime affected so many people, and so you have to understand that when you're writing about a bad guy, especially a true bad guy, a real bad guy, that there were people that were very affected
Hmm.
by the crime, even if it was like the Gilgo murders. If you even look at the Gilgo Beach murders and those women who were prostitutes, and you look at the impact that their murders had, there were
Hmm.
families, sisters, daughters, sons, mothers, fathers that were all
Hmm.
affected by those crimes, brothers, friends. like it was just
Hmm.
amazing to me. So if you pay attention to that when you're writing about these kinds of topics, don't glorify these people, but protect your victims as well. So if you're writing a true crime, change names, places, identities to protect those people. Just recently, I don't know if you heard this, but the Koberger case, the family was actually sent like some death threat after the sentencing hearing.
Hmm.
They were sent a death threat by some idiot who
Some pro
basically,
burger. Yeah.
yeah, that basically said, I know a guy who wants to be a serial killer up there in Moscow, and they're going to come after you, and I have your address, and like made this legitimate like death threat.
Hmm.
I'm thinking, first of all, you're an idiot, because of course they're going to turn that over to the cops, and you're going to get caught. But also, like, what a disrespectful, awful thing to do to these people who've
So
already
somebody
been
that's
through
already been
enough.
through a lot.
Right. So
2 minute break. What are you doing? What does that look for? I can't hear you all of a sudden.
I
Is your
muted.
mic?
Um, I went on to Facebook Marketplace really quick,
Hmm.
and the crocodile from Peter Pan, from the original Disney Peter Pan, there is
Hmm.
a music box for sale that I am like literally gagaing over. It's in Boise, and I want to go get
Oh
it
my goodness.
so bad right now. I can't afford this. I just spent $180 on bark. But I want this so bad. Oh dear.
How
I have
much is
problems.
it?
175 bucks.
Yes. Ooh, damn.
Yeah, I can't afford it. Not,
Yeah, that's whack. Okay.
yeah, that's whack.
Um,
Anyway, so we were
okay.
on this thing about not glorifying
Yes.
criminals.
Well, and also, so we don't want to glorify criminals, right? But we do want people to understand these are just people,
Right.
people who have made mistakes, people who have taken the wrong path. All the people in your people in your all the people in your
All the
people,
people in your people.
all the people in your stories are actually people. Like,
Right.
especially like true crime, part of the thing is like when we look at the Idaho murders and the Kroberger case, right? The two of the most tragic people in the story are the two survivors,
Yeah.
right? Their friends were killed in the house where they were sleeping
Right.
while this guy got away and walked away.
And
Now he didn't
one of
get
them
away.
even saw them. One of them even saw
Hmm.
him as he was leaving. Like, how
Hmm.
do you live with that? That poor girl.
Yeah. I mean, there's PTSD and all that stuff involved, but here's the flip side of that we have to examine and think about is if you are going to write realistic criminals, they're people, they're the hero of their own stories, and they also have parents and brothers and sisters and people in their lives who were their friends or who were, their classmates or whatever. And you think about those people who think, well, I should have noticed something, I should have seen something. Or people that in some cases their parents support them despite the fact
Right.
that they are convicted, despite the fact that we know that your son or daughter did it and that they are not a good person,
Or
right?
children that still support their parents, like
Hmm.
Chad Daybell's kids. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Like this is to me, to me, this is insane. This is an insane level of support, right? I'm
Mm-hmm.
supporting someone that does not deserve my support. However, when it is your relative or your friend
Or your
or
mother
whatever
or
the
your
case may
father.
be, or
Mm-hmm.
your mother or your father, that's an entirely different story. So I think that as authors, the more we can present the humanity of both sides, probably the greater impact that we have, because there are people whose lives were impacted on both sides by any case that you ever write about.
Fiction or
right? And the
not.
more that you can have fiction or real life, and the
Mm-hmm.
more that you can show that, then let's imagine that you are the mother who abused your child, but you've since grown up and become an adult. Let's say you got clean because you were an addict or whatever, and your kid goes to prison for killing someone, and you know that your parenting and some of the things that you did when that child was younger shaped them into the person they are today. What do you feel like?
Mm-hmm. How about this? I mean,
You
like I
know?
said, I threw out this book that I'm working on. One of the suggestions that I'm going to give is, in order to make this character the initial dead body that's supposed to trigger every reader into like, oh my gosh, we got to figure this out, create the relationship. All you have to do is create the relationship. You can turn around and you can say it's his brother. You can turn around and you can say it's his friend from high school that's been an informant all these years. You can say he's an
Mm-hmm.
undercover drug dealer. There's some other things that you can do to create that relationship that will raise the stakes and make that become more relatable to the reader so that they can instantly go, oh my gosh, you have to figure this out. you know
Right.
what made the Gilgo Beach killings and kind of put them on the map was, and I don't know if you don't know this, it's really cool, but it's not cool, but it's an amazing story. Was a prostitute that was miraculously um able to make a phone call while she was thought she was being pursued. Now, nobody can prove that she was being pursued. Some people speculate that she wasn't being pursued at all and she was just high on drugs, but she made a phone call and she screamed into the phone that she was being chased by people who wanted to kill her. And the phone ended with her screaming and then disconnected. And they didn't find her body. And in the process of looking for her body, they found 4 other bodies. This is how they discovered the serial killer. Now, the reason they were even looking for her in the first place is because her family was desperate to find out what happened to her. So even though she was a
Mm-hmm.
prostitute, even though she was a sex worker, she had family that cared about her and knew who she was, and they didn't let up. And they had this 911 call that was absolutely, and to this day, excruciating to listen to because she's screaming for help. And the woman on the line is like almost treating it like it's not a big deal.
Mm-hmm.
And so anyway, they ended up they did find her, spoiler alert, they do find her body, but they still to this day haven't solved that murder. They haven't linked her to the Go-Go case.
Mm-hmm.
And they say that she accidentally drowned. Do you see my
Mm.
if you're on my podcast, like there's a look of skepticism that I'm trying
Yeah.
to convey through the
There's a
microphone
raised
here.
eyebrow that's like, yeah,
She
accidental drowning.
accidentally drowned. But anyway,
Well, oh,
my
yeah.
point is that that created that relationship, that created that immediate like national attention because the family said, this is our sister, this is my daughter, look at how beautiful she was. And
Right.
she was beautiful, she was absolutely beautiful, and she is missing and nobody is looking. And it shined a huge spotlight on that state and that case, and it eventually led to the capture of the serial killer. But it also uncovered a dirty cop in the process. I mean, it's quite the story.
Yep.
But the thing is that this woman who didn't have some, in some people's eyes would be considered, like you said, that high risk victim that like whatever, she's inconsequential.
Mm-hmm.
She did have an impact, but you have to create those relationships. And like you said, it all has to do with the impact that
Mm-hmm.
a crime like that can have on, and the ripple effect it can have on a community and a family and so on and so forth. So make
Mm-hmm.
sure that you are staying true. And this is going to be another one of those tips, staying true to those emotional stakes. Make sure that those emotional stakes are high so that people, when they're reading your story,
Mm-hmm.
they are sucked in and they are invested in helping solve that crime, like you said, Troy, along with the
Yeah.
investigator.
Empathy for the victim is a big deal. If you can
Hmm.
also create empathy for the killer,
For the killer.
then
That's
that's
an
an
interesting
even
aspect.
bigger deal.
That's an
That's an
interesting.
even more interesting aspect of things.
Hmm.
Essentially, the more empathy you can create for every character in your book, the more that your reader is going to be invested, and in some cases, be a little bit confused about who to root for, right?
Yeah,
And that's okay, right?
that's
That's
okay.
okay. That's actually good. And sometimes this happens in real life too. We say, yeah, that guy turned out to be a killer, but damn, look at his parents, right? And look at what he
Yeah.
went through in his childhood. Like, man, I wouldn't have wanted to go through that. How would I feel if that's what had happened to me? Well, that's terrible, right?
Hmm.
That's awful. So uh, there's just so many more layers to it. And I want to argue this really quick here, even though this isn't really what we're talking about, but I just recorded a presentation that I'm doing at a conference this weekend, a virtual
Hmm.
conference this weekend. I recorded the presentation at a time. And part of it is talking about how to stand out as an author in the age of AI. And
Yeah.
here's the thing, AI can create a pattern of clues, it can create a great mystery of some sort or another, right? But what AI cannot create, and the human
It's
element that you
empathy.
add, is that empathy for your characters. As I've said tons of times, and I'll say probably tons of times more, writing is about thinking and feeling, and thinking and feeling is something AI cannot do,
Right.
right? It can simulate that, but it cannot actually. And you, as a human, when you're writing things, are going to add things that are like a subtle touch, a subtle little thing,
Hmm.
right? That is not something that sometimes even that you're consciously thinking about that you're adding to your fiction, but that makes a huge difference in how that reads and how a reader reacts to it. I mean,
Right.
it's that humanity is a big deal. And a part of that is that empathy that you create for your characters. So when it comes to crime things, one of the more realistic things that you should focus on is the people. Yeah, we want to get some of the details about the poison right, right? Like ethylene glycol, if somebody drinks it, they're not going to collapse right away. 12
Hmm.
hours later, they'd be dead. But they're not going to collapse like in some dramatic fashion on their couch or whatever,
No.
right? So understand how things work, right?
Hmm.
So I mean, that's fine, but at the same time, just understand that people are people. And it's
Hmm.
really important to focus on that and who the people are in your stories. Same thing with true crime. The more we focus on people, especially the victims, what we tend to do is study the killers because we
Hmm.
want to understand what makes them tick. We want to understand that why. But one of the things we can never forget is that the podcast I was on, every podcast, several times during the podcast, we mention the names of the
Of the
victims
victims.
because that's
Hmm.
them and their families are the ones that really matter. We don't want this guy to get a lot of glory. Now, we want to figure him out and then we want to put him away and dismiss him and get him out of our heads, right? And
Everybody
hopefully he
wants these
dies in
people and the bad
obscurity.
guys. Right. Hmm.
Yeah. We want him to get caught and we want to put him away and put him in obscurity as much as possible. And usually that doesn't happen with serial killers or certain types of murderers because we continue to study them. So their name continues to come up. But it's just really important as an author to understand how important it is that your audience empathizes with and understands that victim as well.
I agree.
Same thing in true crime. But anyway,
I agree.
yeah.
I agree. So I'm gonna leave this with our as our final like tip,
Okay.
but I think it's a really good one is to make sure that because this is my number one pet peeve as an editor is structure, understanding and knowing structure and using it to your advantage and understanding plot structure. And I'm going to do a little plug here for Troy because plot structure is a huge part of writing. And I think a lot of authors will come to me and say, "Oh, I have this really great premise." And when they shoot off their premise, first of all, it's always an unpracticed premise, which is fine because as an editor, I can see the nuances between it. I can read between the lines.
Hmm.
But when I see that they didn't think it through and they didn't put it in a structure and there is no structure, like then I immediately get, oh crap, now we got a lot of work, because now there's no structure,
Hmm.
there's no I mean the fact that they don't even know what a three-act structure looks like or that there's an inciting incident and turning point and point of no return and there's no climate, and all those things are not there. It's very 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 frustrating because what it does is it's like somebody vomited on a page and created a middle school project. And I'm now
Hmm.
looking at a poster board with all these crazy ass colors everywhere, and there's no real way to map myself through that story. And structure is very much a literary device in and of itself. It's how you, like Troy said, you plant the clues, the red herrings, and you help the reader have that experience of helping you solve the crime. And so you need to understand those things in crime, but this is true for every story out there. Every story out there has
Hmm.
structure. There needs to be structure. If you don't believe it, go watch Superman. I mean, go watch every movie out there that is a blockbuster. It like, and we've had conversations usually like Oppenheimer. You hated it.
Oh yeah, hated it,
Why?
hated it.
Why? No, it probably lacked structure. It probably
Well,
lacked structural
it
elements that
it lacked
required
a
it.
few key things, and
Mm-hmm.
one of them is structure, is a solid structure that you could actually follow as the
Mm-hmm.
viewer. But the other one is a solid theme. I've
Right.
seen the movie now 3 times because I've done analysis of it, not because I
Mm-hmm.
loved it, right? But because I'm trying to analyze it the best I can, and I still don't know what the movie was about and what kind of movie it was.
Right. Right.
It was not a biopic of Oppenheimer. It was not a war pick. It was not a theme about peace versus war. It wasn't any of those things. I don't
Because it
know what it
didn't,
was.
right. Because it
It
didn't
was just a
follow. Yeah.
series of events strung together.
Like I
Um,
said,
but
it's a
so
poster board.
when you're talking about structure, though, what I like about this is there are a few genres where structure matters more than others. And you can absolutely discovery write a romance or a mystery.
Oh,
You
yeah.
absolutely can, as long as you go back afterwards and
And fix
check your
it.
structure, right?
Have to
And
fix
really,
it.
sometimes for some people, once you've been writing mysteries, thrillers for a while, then that check takes less time than it
Right.
used to because you've got
Right.
a feel for it, right? You
Right.
got a feel for that structure, you got a feel for that, but you can still make mistakes. So you go back and check, right? Just to
Mm-hmm.
make sure. But my other argument about that is that almost every story includes some elements of mystery or romance or something similar, which is why you need structure. An action adventure has
Mm-hmm.
elements of a mystery and sometimes elements of romance as
Romance.
well.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Sci-fi, fantasy, all of
All of
those
them.
things, and fantasy, especially if you're going to the epic level, for the love of everything that's holy, please have structure, because
Mm-hmm.
otherwise you're wandering all over the land. And while we love your descriptions of trees and paths and rivers and lakes, some of us don't love them, but some people do. So I'm just going to go with that they love them, right? But no matter what, like we love all of that, but really what it's about is the story. What
It's
is the
about
story
purpose. Mm-hmm.
about? What is the theme? It's about having a focus and something for us to focus on. A mystery and a romance are the reason they're great subplots a lot of times. It gives the reader something to focus on, even if you're telling some literary epic or some relationship tale or some biopic or whatever the case may be. In the case of The Killing Jar, and the true crime memoir that was more of a
Mm-hmm.
memoir than a story, there are ways to structure that that the reader would have been more satisfied at the end. Or at least if they aren't satisfied, what happens is we give readers this feeling of satisfaction, but not resolution.
Well, and that's what I got from the
You
kill
know,
jar. But I went in there with the right mind frame. You know what I mean? I knew exactly
because it
what I
was
was
marketed
getting.
wrong.
It was
There are
marketed
things
wrong.
that are what we call, and I brought this up in the podcast last week because really what this is in real life, we have a lot of these, and it's what we call a modern story. And
Hmm.
as far as when you're talking about story structure, but what it means is there's sort of a resolution, but there's no hero. No
Hmm.
one saves the day, and there's no clear winner. So at the end, the audience feels like, yeah, we concluded the story, but actually, I feel like somebody kind of beat me up.
Hmm.
Right? Well, that's not a bad thing because you're making the reader think about this type of story and what's actually happening here and stuff like that, right? Okay, wonderful, great, awesome. That's a great way to do that. But just understand what you're doing when you're doing it. Don't do it accidentally because then that affects how you market that story.
Right.
How do you market that story to the world? And you don't market it as a romance or as a mystery that gets a resolution because clearly that doesn't work, you know.
Right. Right.
So, yeah,
Exactly. So
anyway.
yeah, so just yeah, and I'm, a lot of true crime, like you said, there's no happy ending in any true crime, in my opinion, ever. Even when you read I'm scanning through my brain at like I'm thinking of thrillers, like mystery thrillers that are crime thrillers like
Hmm.
Dan Brown, and like
Well, yeah,
even in
there's one I read
they
last year
have
that's called
resolutions, but not really happy endings.
well, yeah, there's one I read last year. It's called We Lie Here, and
Oh
it's
yeah.
kind of a great thriller, pretty tense, stuff like that. But here's the deal with all of those, and this is partly what you have to acknowledge as a writer when you come down to the conclusion, is that this is a resolution, but somebody still died.
Hmm. They're still
So somebody
victims.
is still missing their family member. They're still victims, right? In Harvested, my first in the Max Boucher series, right?
Hmm.
It starts out, we learn about how Max lost his family, and then we have this mystery about all these dogs. But like in the process, people have been hurt. And when we come down to the end, his wife and family, he has more information than he did when he started, but they're still gone,
Hmm.
right? There's still a hole inside of him that nothing really can fill because they're still gone, right? That's part of that is you want to leave your characters with that because it's true. Like,
Hmm.
and there are some cases that police detectives will tell you, like, every detective has that case that haunts them, that
Yep.
either they weren't able to solve or they were able to solve, but it really was an
But it was just
unsatisfactory ending. Like, it's just heartbreaking and
right.
heartrending type ending.
Even if they
Well,
catch the people, there's
even if they
cops that
catch
are
them, it's
haunted forever.
yeah, they've
Yeah.
seen crime scenes that are just terrible or whatever the case may be. So
Hmm.
let your characters feel that.
Hmm.
That yeah, all the things we've talked about so far are really important. Structure, realism to a certain extent, or understanding that you're creating a fantasy and world building in a way that makes it believable to the reader. And having your
Hmm.
characters be empathetic and believable and all that kind of stuff, and structure, all those things are really important. But again, it comes down to that human element of things. So don't neglect that. That is the number one thing that can set you apart, make you a writer that creates
People
stories
really
that we really
want.
want to read.
Yeah, people
Yeah,
want to
that we
read.
really want to read.
Yeah, really want to read. So yeah, just yeah, it's always going to come down to that human element, isn't it? Like for
Hmm.
any story at
Yeah.
all.
Call back to our
Um
conversation with Johnny last week.
yeah, and the one before that
Exactly
about
what we're talking about.
AI, like it's always
Yep.
it's always going to be about humans, and it's always going to be about our relationships with each other, and it's always going to be about our perspectives and points of view as we go through this thing
Hmm.
called life, and the connections and relationships that we have with one another, and yeah, and ultimately becoming better humans as we and
Hmm.
really these books are meant to yeah make us pause. The best books are the ones that make us go, that make us feel like we got hit in the chest and go
Hmm.
and take a minute and go, holy crap, that hits me a little bit closer to home than I wanted it to. Makes
Hmm.
us introspectively examine our own behavior and motives and how we treat each other so that we can be better. That's what books are supposed to do. Even fiction, folks, even
Hmm.
fiction. So please make sure that you're always writing in those levels of empathy and relationships and feelings, because that is what matters. That's why we teach show don't tell, because we empathize with action. We don't empathize with words. We don't empathize with
Hmm.
he felt upset. We
Hmm.
empathize with his brows furrowed and he squinted his eyes and he closed his fist tightly because he couldn't stand any exposure to the air because it hurt to think about the pain he was feeling. Like we empathize with that. We empathize with, oh my gosh, I've felt that before, or the pain and the ache
Hmm.
that it feels when your heart hurts because you've lost somebody that you care about and your heart physically aches. We all, what those of us who've lived a little bit, feel that. We've all
Hmm.
felt that before. So write those things, those feelings, because that's where your senses, your sight, smell, touch, and hearing, all those things that we use to input information into our brain will feel what you're writing. And
Hmm.
we can talk more about, how to write sensory, how to write with your senses in another podcast. I think that would be a good one, but,
Hmm.
kind of explore that. But I love that we talked about this because I've been like,
Hmm.
I'm following the dentist right now. I cannot believe, like, I don't know if anyone's following this guy in Colorado. What an ass. But anyway, he I have no sympathy for him, but he not only murdered his wife, but murdered her with like 3 or 4 different poisons. He just kept trying.
Hmm.
He did cyanide, eye drops, he did it all. Arsenic. And then but what's crazy is we were all expecting him to put up a defense, and he didn't. He rested this yesterday with no defense. Like the
Hmm.
defense rests. And we all just went like, what? Like what? This whole time he's been like totally putting up this, my wife did this to herself defense with all their cross examinations, and he didn't put up a defense or put up any witnesses. So
Hmm.
I'm really curious how the jury is going to go on this one. But anyway, crazy stuff. But the empathy and sympathy goes up. She had 6 kids, like she went through a lot of pain. She was in the hospital, in and out of the hospital for weeks, trying to figure out why she was sick. Awful.
Hmm.
But all the feelings that I've had for this case is because I've empathized with the fact that this woman went through a lot of pain before she died.
Hmm.
It was kind of sadistic if you think about it. And if you know what arsenic does to the body, if you know what cyanide does to the body, if you know what eye drops do to the body, holy crap. This woman thought she had diabetes, thought she was having a heart attack, thought she was having a stroke, like all the feelings that you have, the throwing up. At one point she had thrown up so much that like she was having seizures or something. She was having micro seizures because she was throwing up so much.
Oh man,
Just crazy.
it's terrible. If the guy had only
Yeah.
known about strychnine, it would have been over.
Right. Right. Like, but
I
yeah,
mean,
he left a trail. And like you said, how you were talking about, like, there's means, motives, you know,
hmm.
he had means. He was ordering these poisons through his dentist office.
Oh yeah, as if that's some kind of legitimate medical thing. Oh yeah, we
Yeah.
needed that because
Yeah. That's the thing that has, yeah, other
I
dentists were like, what? And then to turn around and say, well, I was ordering them for my wife because she wanted to kill herself with the poisons.
yeah, so that's what you do when your wife wants to kill herself is you help her along.
You help her along and
You
you get her
know?
poison. And then you don't tell anybody, hey, by the way, my wife, she's been taking
Yeah.
these poisons.
And you order them online as if, like
Right.
you don't get cyanide by going and picking up some rat poison at Home Depot
Right.
and use cash and wear a disguise. Instead, you
You
order it
order it on
online
Amazon. Yeah.
business, to your business and get it delivered. You're like, how in the world did I get caught? See, this is another instance, guys, I know we kind of close things out, but this is another
Yeah. Yeah.
instance of like where
Write
real
it
life
believable.
does not match, right? Like,
Right.
here's the thing, like the Idaho murders, the part of that that doesn't work is that he dropped the sheath and left it at the scene. That
Right.
is an amateur mistake. And this is one of the points I made on the podcast too. And I'm like, I hate to say this way, but he made a freshman mistake or an amateur mistake, which implies that there are professionals who do not make this level of mistakes when it comes to crime.
It's so
So
weird.
I don't want to glorify that as like a profession, like, man, this other guy was professional and this guy was amateur hour. But he was like he made what I
Right.
would call freshman mistakes in
Yeah.
in on a senior level project,
Right.
you know.
Right.
And so don't put it that way to your
No.
except when you're talking like on a podcast like this or privately or whatever the case may be. But understand that that's really what's happening. Like you can't have I could not write a book and have a criminal who was thoughtful and really trying to get away with something leave a knife sheath at the
At the
scene with
scene.
his DNA on it.
Right.
That the things that he did for someone who had studied criminology and knew as much as he did were foolish mistakes, right? Okay,
But isn't that the
you know.
case? I mean, that is really like that's what's so interesting about this. It's kind of like the husband that killed his wife with that BAM that in Colorado. I think he's also in Colorado, but the case was in Colorado. They arrested him in Arizona. He's been extradited back to Colorado, but he killed his wife with this tranquilizer, and they found her body months later. The prosecutor, by the way, that's another wild case, but they found this tranquilizer in her bone marrow, and it was a tranquilizer that could only be ordered by prescription, and he was the only person outside of the federal like wilderness and the what is it, the wildlife and wilderness, BLM people. He was the only one within like 16 states that had this prescription.
Hmm. Oh, yeah.
That's a
The
rookie
yeah.
move.
The thing about it,
Like,
this is the thing about using something exotic,
yeah,
poisons or exotic methods in
right.
your writing is a sure way for a criminal to get caught, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because what you're going to use is what's at hand. Ethylene glycol is one of the most popular poisons.
Mm-hmm. It's
Why?
easy. You can get
It's
it.
hard to detect. It's easy to get. It's hard to detect in an autopsy because it mirrors symptoms of like neurological
Flu.
issues
Not only
or
that, flu
cardiology.
or just sick. You're just
Yeah.
sick.
If you have a high enough dose, you appear intoxicated at
Yeah.
first. So people think,
Oh,
oh,
he's drunk.
you are drunk. And
Mm-hmm.
12 hours later, all of a sudden you projectile vomit across your living room and then collapse and you're done. Right?
Right.
Now, that's that's an extremely common poison. It's also extremely easy to get. Everybody has some ethylene glycol in their house, more than likely.
Yeah.
So you can't point to one person, or you can't say, oh, he must have bought it at such and such pharmacy because that's the only place you can get it,
Right.
right? Your criminal is going to use common rope that he can pick up at Walmart or Ace Hardware. Why? He's not going to order exotic hemp rope from a supplier that's in Bangladesh and it's hand woven by monks, right? Because first of all, nobody's going to believe that he'd fricking do that. Second of all, how would you not get caught? I mean, come on, dude. Use your freaking head. And so, even if a criminal is at all someone who's supposed to be intelligent, oh, because just this is, I don't know if this even belongs in this podcast. I guess, well, here's the deal. Okay. One of the mistakes that authors make is their antagonists are either really stupid,
Yeah.
so they should get caught really easily, or their heroes are really stupid and the
Yeah.
antagonist is really smart and the hero misses clues that he should have picked up on
Mm-hmm.
a long time ago. Like there is no way that he should go through this entire book or this entire process without getting caught. It doesn't make any sense. Of
Mm-hmm.
course, it doesn't make any sense. No, that is not the way these things work, right?
Right.
So, I mean, it's one of the downfalls. One of the things I hate most as an editor is when I get a hero that is just like, dude, this makes no sense because this guy has no clue, right?
Right.
No, your heroes need to be smart, your antagonists need to be smart, and it need to be a battle of wits. And both of
Mm-hmm.
them must be armed opponents. You
Yes.
cannot have, no. Anyway, but that's another tangent. Gosh, another Troy tangent. But it does make sense. Like, don't do those crazy things with your writing because you think, oh, I found this really cool way that people die. No, there's really simple ways that people die,
Mm-hmm.
and for the most part, criminals are going to use what's at hand. They're not going to, even if it's premeditated, they're going to use what they have readily available and what's common,
Right.
right? They're not going to go to trouble of, they're not going to hike up the side of a mountain and harvest some plant. No, not going to happen. You know.
Yeah. Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah. I mean, and that's just it. That's why I love real life versus books. I mean, that's kind of the thing here, right? But in real life, this is the stuff that gets them caught. Is it they and I there is a quote that a lot of cops have used on several occasions that I just never can nail down because they say it differently every time. But basically a lot of cops say it. They say that uh a criminal um a criminal can make um wait, a cop can make him a lot of mistakes, but a criminal can only make one because you've got a lot of brains on the other side of the on
Hmm.
the boat that
You got
against
a
the
lot of,
one brain.
yeah.
So you've got a lot of cops working, a lot of experts, a lot of forensics examiners, a lot of you've got the coroner, the medical examiner, you've got all kinds of people, you've got district attorneys, you've got prosecuting attorneys, you've got all these people that work to find that key like nail in the
Hmm.
coffin, and you've only got one criminal, and all that has to happen is that criminal has to make a mistake. And in the case of Koberger, he made several, right? He made several.
Right.
It wasn't just the sheath. He drove his own car out there. He had he used stupid ass mistakes. He had all of the things that led up to it, like he continued to make mistake after
Hmm.
mistake after mistake. And then the same thing with like Chad Daybell and Lori Daybell, and the same thing with the
Hmm.
Gilgo murders. It just takes more time. I would say that probably most nuanced and the hardest to find is the Gilgo guy, but only because they didn't know, like you said, it had to do with his demographic and who he was hunting. And
Hmm.
people,
And it has to do with the time and place
mhm.
that the crime took place. Why is it easier to write murder mysteries set in a small town?
Yeah.
There's fewer cameras.
Hmm.
I mean, let's just be real about the whole thing. In the city, now everybody and their brother has a ring camera and you don't know who it is. So even
And
if the victim does not
this
have a ring camera, well, yeah, and phones.
and
People
cell
are out taking
phones
selfies and stuff on
all
their
the
phones,
time,
and you never know when you're going to be in the background of a picture like that,
right?
something like that. Like it is, it is harder to get
Hmm.
away with it in those circumstances, provided that the police have a reason to look for the footage.
Right.
And that's anyway, that's a whole other, we could go down a whole road about
Oh,
how to
yeah.
plan crimes. And in some ways, I don't want to do that 100% because I don't want to give people like
I don't
come to
want to
our
give people
podcast and go,
ideas.
yeah, let's look. Troy's got an instruction manual, even though I could write one. And some of you criminals, if I wrote it, should probably read it, but I'd have to sell it on the dark web. And, you'd have to torrent it and pay me in Bitcoin. And it's just a real pain. So I'm not going to do it. But some of you should pay attention. But I mean, the truth is, what happens, most crimes, even if they're pre-planned to an extent, or crimes of opportunity. I'm going to get what I have at hand, or what I
Hmm.
can easily get, or what I think will be difficult to detect because I'm going to take as many precautions as possible not to get caught.
Right.
The issue is that people don't fully understand the multitude of ways they can be caught, and that you really like you only have to make one mistake. Like really, what we think happened with Koberger, even though he will not disclose his
He
crimes, which
won't.
I really am ticked off that that was not part of the plea
The
deal. It's
plea
the one
deal,
thing
me
that I'm really
too.
upset about that. But anyway, whatever. But the basic premise though is that more than likely he dropped the sheath when he was surprised by Ethan and
Oh,
had to
yeah.
kill an extra person, right?
Hmm.
But what he didn't understand, even having studied criminology and studied criminals, was how easy for that is to happen, and then how easy it is to get outside or get back to wherever you're from and go, oh, I'm missing the sheath.
You know,
Oh crap,
what's
right?
interesting to me is I don't think anyone really understands. I mean, until you feel it, but I don't think people really, criminals included, I don't think they really understand the level of adrenaline and what that does to your body when you do
Hmm.
those kinds of things. Good example of this. I was on I have a good friend, and he got himself a V-Rod, which is a really fast motorcycle. Okay. he thought it would be really funny to put Stacey on the back of that motorcycle and take me down the street. And dude, first of all, there's no back seat in a V-Rod, but whatever. So I sat behind this little Scotsman, wrapped my arms as tightly as I could around the man, and he hit the throttle. And it was 0 to 100 really fast, like really fast. And he did it down the street and back when, and I won't say where, but on a street where there's not very many stop signs here in Idaho, which is, there's a lot of those roads. But anyway, he took me outside of my house, down and back. And when I got back, um, he got pulled up in front of my house and my legs were shaking, like violently shaking, and I couldn't stop them there. And I felt this overwhelming sense of cold come over me, and I couldn't walk. I got off the bike and I was like struggling to walk. And that was just the adrenaline that was going through my body at that moment.
Hmm.
When people create, go through these types of heightened situations, their adrenaline is pumping through their body. Like Koberger, he probably would had so much adrenaline going through his body at the time when he was leaving. He may have appeared calm, but his brain wasn't functioning, like he wouldn't have been thinking. That's why
That's
it's not hard for these guys to make these stupid mistakes, because their adrenaline is pumping when this is going on.
well, and that's part of what happens is you go into this fight or flight mode, kind
Mm-hmm.
of.
Mm-hmm.
But the other thing that happens in so what happens with soldiers and police officers and stuff like that who go into life-threatening situations is your brain shuts off and you
Right.
react instinctively, which is why training is so important,
Right.
right? Because you train to shoot in the military, right? And you shoot over and over and over and over and over again until it
Loads of
becomes
times.
instinct.
Right.
And the reason it's important for it to become instinct is because you are not going to think through that process when you get to a wartime situation. I am not going to be thinking, okay, hold breath, pause, aim, triple sight, all the different things. Like I'm not going to be
Mhm.
thinking about it in a crisis situation. I'm going to pull up, boom, follow my instinct and pull the trigger. If I've been trained properly, everything goes smoothly in that moment. If
Right.
I have not, everything goes terribly. I can't
Right.
hit the broadside of a barn,
Right.
right? Because training is so important. So, in some ways, criminals through practice get
Get
training
better. Mm-hmm.
and they get better. Well, if in the case of Koberger, like
He
we
got caught
caught him
first
the
time. First time.
first time out, I believe this was his first time out.
Mm-hmm.
There's
Me
a
too.
whole debate around that, but I believe this was his first time out. When somebody like that gets caught first time out, the reason is they didn't have time to practice.
Mm-hmm.
Every serial killer, a lot of times the reason they're caught is we find evidence later on that implicates them in an earlier killing where they
Earlier.
made the
Mm-hmm.
mistake, right? It's a very common thing that happens, right? So that practice thing is important, right? It's practice. I mean, and here's why that's
And it
why it's
also can
important to
make them
practice as a
lazy.
writer,
There's
you
two
know.
sides of
Well,
that,
yeah, there's
but
they
it can
get
make them
cocky.
lazy. Mm-hmm.
They get cocky and lazy and think the cops are never going to catch me. I've got
Mm-hmm.
this thing down, and then they don't have it
Yeah.
down.
That was the case of
So,
Israel Keys, but he got cocky
well,
and
like
lazy, but
Bundy
Mhm. Bundy got
he
lazy.
lost control. No, he lost
Mm-hmm.
control. He lost those
Hi.
last two. He was angry and lost control. Oh, hi. Are you coming to see? Okay.
Oh.
Okay. He's
Everybody meet
hungry.
McLean.
Yeah. Okay, go lay down. I'll come get you in a minute.
He's such a good dog. Anyway, so yeah,
Anyway,
so we did
yeah, I
we
know.
did an amazing life for off the cuff. This was good. And
Yeah,
like you said, Troy and I are like, we're big true crime fans. I mean, crime fans in general. I mean, it's, and I
yeah.
hate to say that because I mean it was Appleman that cornered me in my own way of thinking when the time I met him. But basically he asked the room, how many of you are true crime fans? And of course I enthusiastically raised my hand, right? And he says, what the hell is wrong with you?
Hmm.
And I was
Which
like,
is
wow.
this is if you look at the true crime movement, it's true. Like what draws us?
to the dark side
to
of the
our
moon.
attempts to
Mm-hmm.
understand the dark side of humanity. And I
Mm-hmm.
really do think it's because we all have a dark side, and there are
I think
moments
so
when we
too.
can all say, but for the grace of God, there go I, type
I
thing,
think it's
you
all,
know.
I think it has to do with decisions. I think all of us look at each other and say, you know what would make somebody make that decision? And we want to know why, because ultimately we all are faced with choices in our life and we all have to decide whether we're going to go right or
Hmm.
left in those days, in those moments. And I think that what fascinates us is understanding why some people go left instead of right. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
Like, why did they go that
Yep.
way? So, and
Yeah. What
understanding that.
happened?
Yeah, what
Yeah.
happened? What went wrong? Why would they do that?
Yeah.
That kind of thing. But ultimately, I think that's what it is. But it is true. I mean, you have to be a little twisted, but at the same time, I'm not going to fault people for doing it. Again, it's one of those things where I'm like, I always want to see the bad guy get caught. That's my issue. I want to see bad guys get caught. So that's what I'm
Yeah.
looking for. Is I'm looking for the hit of dopamine that, okay, they got caught. And if I watch a 48
Yeah.
hours or something and they're saying this case is still unsolved, I'm very angry. I'm like, why
Yeah,
haven't we
because
caught this person?
you don't get your dopamine hit. Well, yeah,
Mm-mm.
that's another thing. People get really upset about that. Like, why can't you just catch the person? And I'm like,
Right.
because it's not that easy. Also, a part of it is that, like we talked about earlier, that ability to prove it in court. We should do a whole other thing about court and stuff like
Oh my
that.
gosh, the court procedures is just it's
Because
that's infuriating. It's so hard
yeah,
because you have all
it's
these rules.
difficult. Yeah, it's difficult to write well unless you are an insider in that particular
Mhm.
thing. And it's
Well, you're
frustrating.
we're kind of working on one right now, aren't we? Where we're kind of
Hmm.
like the backside of it, where the criminal justice system is a little bit of a they're the bad guy
Well,
in
yeah,
this
because
story.
that's where we could bring up the Steve Avery case and talk about an actual conspiracy, not a conspiracy theory, but an actual conspiracy that, well, we convicted a guy, and so we're going to keep him in jail, even though now we have the evidence that he didn't do it, because we're
Right.
certainly not going to admit that we were wrong.
Yeah.
And in part, that's because it calls into question everything else you've done so far. And
Exactly.
I get that on the part of law enforcement, but I also understand that poor guy is sitting in jail and doesn't deserve it.
Doesn't
And
deserve
when
it.
he finally gets out, anyway.
It'll be
So,
interesting.
yeah,
It'll be interesting. But
yeah.
anyway, I hope this is helpful. I hope this was enjoyable. It's more enjoyable. It's kind of more like a guilty pleasure of mine to kind of talk true crime. But
Mhm.
anyway, maybe it helps you understand story and nuance a little bit when it comes to elements, crime elements in your stories. But yeah, um, maybe I'll include like a little checklist with this podcast so that you can have this little like checklist of making sure that you're following these rules when you're writing any kind of crime elements in your story, and you can apply this to
Mm.
your writing. But again, like, subscribe, follow, get notified for future episodes. I think I don't know, do we want to talk next week on anything specific? Do you have anything? Do we want to
I
talk about
think we'll
maybe some
come up with
craft
it
or
also.
okay.
And I have an idea for a couple guests in the near future,
Ooh,
so I'll talk to you
cute.
about those too.
Okay, good.
So, yeah.
Okay, I'm excited. All right, then,
All right.
everybody. Well, thanks again. We'll see you next week.